There's cat hair on this vibrator. Lovely. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Cece. I'm an artist and designer based in New York City, and I love to talk about all things sex. In case you don't know, I am essentially the CEO of Sex Positivity. I live, laugh, love sex positivity. I make erotic art. I run an organization called Asians for Sex Positivity. Sex positivity is like a whole personality trait of mine. So today we're going to talk about it. I think my relationship to sex positivity has really been changing throughout the years, and I kind of wanted to talk about that whole journey and the nuances of sex positivity and why I think it's a lot more complicated than people think. We're just gonna have a little yap session. I'm gonna talk about how I became so sex positive, even though I grew up in a traditionally Asian household where sex was very stigmatized, and then talk about how and why I started a whole ass organization devoted to sex positivity, and now having done that for the past 3 years, what I've learned in that process and how my views and my idea of sex positivity has shifted and evolved. So as I've mentioned in some of my previous videos, I grew up in a traditionally Chinese household in Vancouver, Canada. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Vancouver, but there are a lot of Asian immigrants in Vancouver. So I grew up around a lot of people who looked like me, never really had to think about my culture, my Asian background, until I moved to New York when I was 14 years old. Around that same time, I had pretty much come to terms with my sexuality in the sense that I knew that I liked women and I did not like men. I didn't grow up religious, so I didn't have like heterosexuality like really shoved in my face. I obviously knew that like I was different because I liked girls, but I didn't really have to come out to myself. It was kind of just like one day I realized I had a huge crush on my English teacher, and then I was like, okay, cool, I guess I like girls. But at the time, I did not even know what the term gay meant. Like, I just kind of like accepted the fact that I liked girls and women and kind of just went on with my life. And so I moved to New York, and surprisingly, I thought New York was gonna be, so much more diverse. I was gonna be surrounded by a lot more culture, and that actually wasn't the case. I mean, yes, it was a lot more diverse than Vancouver in some aspects, but I was like 1 out of 3 Asian girls in my class. The high school that I went to was predominantly white, so I definitely felt this pressure to assimilate, to really just like shove my Asianness down and try and fit in. I was still learning a lot more about my sexuality. Like, I wasn't fully out to everyone. I was coming out to some of my closest friends, but not everyone in my grade knew that I was queer. And around those years, like, I was masturbating, like I was trying to like figure out my body, trying to figure out what pleasure means, eventually like really wanting to start dating women and getting into like the dating scene. Because as you know, if you have Asian parents, like they really don't want you dating until after you graduate or like after you're done with your academics, and that's something that my parents pushed on me. They literally told me to not date until after college because they wanted me to focus on my studies and focus on getting my degree instead of engaging in distracting activities like dating and sex, and even though they obviously never talked about sex. Once I got to college, I went to an all-women's college too. That really helped me embrace myself more, not only just my queer identity, but my background as an Asian person as well. Like, I was surrounded by a lot of diversity and a lot of different people, and also everyone was very open and very proud to be who they were, so I think that really encouraged me to do the same. During my sophomore year of college, I got into my first relationship, and I had met that person through Tinder, and then essentially the pandemic hits. And, we're locked down, school is all remote. I was kind of navigating through this new relationship with this person. There was also a point where we were long distance, and then kind of had a tumultuous breakup that completely shattered my entire world. Like, I think that was probably one of the hardest moments in my life, like dealing with my first sapphic breakup in the middle of a fucking worldwide global pandemic. that was not a great experience for little baby gay Cece. And I remember going back to visit my parents right after the breakup because I needed a change of scenery. I couldn't stay in this apartment for any longer. I just needed to get the fuck out. And I stayed with my parents, and I told them for the first time that I was in a relationship with someone. I thought it was a great idea that I told them after the fact because there was nothing that could be done about it. And that was when my mom decided to have the sex talk with me. And I was thinking, you're kind of 10 years late to the game, Mom. She proceeded to sit me down and tell me about how heterosexual sex works. And I was kind of just laughing on the inside. I was like, yeah, I know all of this at this point. I get what you're trying to do. She wanted me to make sure that I was keeping myself safe, that I was getting tested. But I was like, this is not the time right now. While my mom was giving me the sex talk, she also was open and vulnerable with me and told me how she didn't feel like she had the tools to talk to me about sex when I was younger. She thought that, I would get all the education I'd need from school, that they would provide me with good sex education, and so that's the reason why she never talked to me about it. So that made me think oh, maybe it wasn't only because my parents thought sex was shameful and something to be shoved under the rug, but that's how I took it. Maybe it's just because they didn't have the tools and the language to explain it to me and to explain it in a way that's, scientifically and medically accurate. And meanwhile, I was also talking to a bunch of my Asian friends about this, and we kind of shared the similar experience in that our parents never talked to us about sex. We felt that in our culture, it is something that is even more taboo and stigmatized than it is already in mainstream American culture. So then I was like, I feel like it would be so great if we had a space dedicated to AAPI folks and also queer folks and also BIPOC folks, where we can talk about sex and exploring our sexuality without having to feel shame or judgment from other people. So that's when Asians for Sex Positivity was born. And I think I immediately went into it being yay, sex positivity, screaming from the rooftops, let's talk about sex. It's a lot more nuanced than that. I remember I asked my friend from college to help me out. I was like, hey, I'm starting this organization. Would you be interested in, volunteering and help us write some things? And she was like, Cece, I'm asexual. I don't know if I'm the right person to help you with this. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, yeah, I don't know if sex positivity is inclusive of people who are ace. And I was like, oh my gosh, of course it is. That was also another light bulb moment when I started to define sex positivity for myself. There's kind of the sex positivity that is defined in mainstream culture, in my opinion, just very whitewashed and heterosexualized sex positivity, whereas I had to really define it for myself. I encourage other people to also define it for themselves. I think at the core of sex positivity is really just accepting people for whatever sexual decisions they want to make as long as consent is involved. I think a huge misconception around sex positivity is that we think that sex is good. I think that's a little bit problematic because if we think that sex is good, having a lot of sex is good, then that kind of means that we're saying that not having sex is bad. You should be having as much or as little sex as you want. So you can be someone who's engaging in hookup culture, having one-night stands, having a lot of casual sex, but you can also be someone who is asexual. You can also be someone who is waiting until marriage, and you can also be sex positive. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I do believe that people who are waiting for marriage can be sex positive, as long as that's something that you are not pushing onto other people. I think making the decision for yourself to be this is something that I want, this is something that I want to save for that one person, that's totally fine. Wait until marriage. But when you're telling someone though that casual sex is shameful, how could you be engaging in casual sex, you're supposed to wait until marriage, really pushing that set of beliefs onto someone else, that is when I think it becomes sex negative. So kind of to summarize, it's all really about knowing what works for your body, knowing what works for yourself, embracing that, but meanwhile not judging and not putting shame onto other people who do things differently. Just to speak from personal experience, once I got into college, I definitely felt this pressure to engage in hookup culture. I was like, fuck, like I haven't even had my first sexual experience with another girl. Like I really need to get on it. The clock is ticking. I felt this pressure just from society, from hookup culture to have sex as soon as I could. And then having taken on sex positivity, I always thought that like, oh, I need a hoe phase. Like I need to just go like fuck around and sleep with other women and like feel empowered by that. And now I'm like, that's just not for me. I think in my head I had this picture of someone who is the most sexually liberated, and there's someone who has a lot of casual sex, might be someone who is involved in BDSM, might be someone who is in a polyamorous relationship, might be someone who is dating multiple people at the same time, has a lot of kinks and fetishes, and goes to play parties. That is kind of what I imagined as the most sex positive, the most sexually liberated person. And I don't think I'm alone in that feeling, but I was also like, wow, that is not me. I run a whole ass organization about sex positivity, and a lot of the sex that I have is vanilla. Actually, the majority of the sex is vanilla. I don't really engage in the BDSM world. I've never been to a play party. I am a serial monogamous. I've also never slept with a single man in my life. And that is absolutely okay. And I still scream from the rooftops that I am fucking sex positive. Like I have so much respect for my friends who are polyamorous, who do go to play parties, who do engage in BDSM. And I want to learn more about their world and how they came into that and how they found their community in that way. And I think that's ultimately what sex positivity is about. It's about embracing your own desires and what you know to be true for yourself and what you want, while also having this curiosity and having respect for people who engage differently than you. But I think more recently I have also seen how sex positivity can kind of get out of hand. A few weeks ago there was a queer talent show that was hosted in New York City. I wasn't personally at this event. I did speak to someone who was there. I was mostly just reading up on it on social media. And I also just wanted to give a quick content warning for public lewdness before I start going into this. So if this isn't something that you want to listen to, feel free to jump to like 2 minutes ahead or pause the video. Just so you have some context, this was an event that was for the queer community. I don't think it was marketed as something that was 18 plus. And so, there could have been minors in the audience. And from what I've learned, a performer got up on stage, and I think people thought that they were gonna do like a spoken word poetry or some sort of like performance, and they ended up masturbating live on stage and squirting in front of an entire audience. When I had heard about what happened, I was in complete shock. I just couldn't fathom how something like that ended up happening and getting to that point. But what made me even more frustrated was seeing a lot of the comments and the discourse about what had happened. There were the people who were actually in the audience who had said that this was really traumatizing. This wasn't something that they had signed up for. There was no trigger warning. And I was seeing people in the comments being like, this isn't as bad as you're making it out to be. Like, masturbating is natural, squirting is just like another bodily function. Like, yes, while I agree that those sentences are true on their own, like, yes, masturbating is normal. Yes, squirting is also normal, but not in a public space where there is no consent involved. When you go to a play party, like when you go to more sexually explicit events, like they make sure that people who are under 18 cannot get in. They also make sure to say beforehand, you have to have another person's consent in order to participate. Those people in the audience did not consent. And I'm gonna be so honest, I would probably be traumatized too if I was in that audience. And I am someone who is so okay with masturbation, with, watching porn, with whatever. I'm an artist. I studied art in college. I've seen a lot of crazy pieces of performance art. And a lot of times I appreciate when people, push boundaries, make people think, make people question their level of comfort. You know, I make erotic paintings and I like pushing the boundaries of what eroticism means. But I think the number one thing that we have to remember with sex positivity is that it's consent-based. Consent is the number one priority. It makes me wonder like where people think the line should be drawn. I think it was so obvious to me that like something like this should just have never happened in the first place. The fact that it did in what seemingly should have been a safe space for queer people just completely blew my mind. Like, I felt really sorry for the people who, you know, are new to the queer scene, who are trying to make new queer friends, are coming into their sexuality, coming into this talent show thinking it was gonna be a safe space for them. And this is something that we don't want to normalize. And I think that's where sex positivity gets a little bit complicated, because for some people it may seem like, yeah, like go masturbate on stage, own your sexuality, do whatever the fuck you want, like masturbating is normal, squirting is normal, people shouldn't be irked out by that. That is where sex positivity becomes so problematic. We should be encouraging people to explore what they like in a safe way, where consent is prioritized, where pleasure is prioritized, where communication and having healthy boundaries is talked about. Like, I don't want to be telling my friends like, yeah, go sleep around, have a lot of sex, like go have your hoe phase, if that's something that they are not comfortable with, and if that's something that they don't want for themselves. Like, I don't want to be pushing that onto someone, even though it might seem like the sex positive thing to do. I think in mainstream culture, people see sex positivity as this thing of like women taking ownership of their sexuality and fucking around with men and reclaiming their power and like dominating men in the bedroom. While I do think like that can be empowering for some people, I don't think that's the case for everyone. I do think that that mindset can ultimately lead to some unhealthy behaviors, you know, pushing that kind of idea onto young people who just are vulnerable and might not want that for themselves. So anyways, yeah, those are just some of my thoughts around sex positivity. I don't think I've actually spoken about sex positivity in this way. I think people just see me as that girl who loves talking about sex and who is so sex positive, but I think there are so many more nuances to sex positivity that we are missing in the conversation right now. This is also just a reminder to people that it's okay to figure things out on your own timeline. You don't have to be having a shit ton of sex to feel sexually liberated, to feel sexually empowered, and to be sex positive. By being sex positive, you are determining for yourself what works best for your body, what works best for your sex life, what works best for your mental health, and that's what's most important. I hope you found this video informative. Thank you for staying until the very end. Please like and subscribe for more sex-related content, and I'll catch you in my next video. Bye.